afternoon, everybody. We are burning daylight. We're 1 minute into our panel. I have had the pleasure of speaking with this incredible group of creatives and entrepreneurs and inventors, and I can't wait to give you an opportunity to meet them and to hear what they have to say as it relates to tech and the arts. As stated, I am James Wilson, the Assistant Regional Director of the Elijah J. McCoy Midwest Regional Office of the United States Patent and Trademark Office in the fabulous city of Detroit. And it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to those of you who are here on the screen with me, Robert Trowers, Chris Pendergast, Mary Lynn Morris, and Daniel Joseph. And I'm going to ask each one of them to start out. I'm going to minimize my talking, and I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves, to articulate what they do, the art in which they're engaged, just the art, because I'll have a lot of follow-up questions, and identify the creation from your mind for which you are a part of this August panel. And I'll start with Robert. Robert Trowers, would you do the honors?
Yeah, Robert Trowers. I'm currently a professor at the North Carolina Central University in Durham, North Carolina. And I've been in the jazz performance area for the last, I'd say about 40 years now. Have had the good fortune of having been in some fairly highly well-known groups. I was with the Lionel Hampton Band for about 4 years. I was with Illinois Jacquettes Band for about 1.5 years. After that, I spent 8 years with the Count Basie Band and went on from there to the Lincoln Center Band under Wynton Marsalis and the Carnegie Hall Band under John Faddis. And in recent years, up until his death, I was the last regular trombonist with Randy Weston's African Rhythms group. As far as my invention, it was a mouthpiece for our brass instruments that I felt would be a good way to solve some of the issues surrounding brass instrument response.
Response and tonality, I would take it.
Right, exactly.
Fantastic. Thank you. Chris Pendergast, would you do us the honors, please? You're muted.
Remember that. I am a musician, primarily an electric guitar player. I'm also an engineer and a teacher, a few other things. I was personally frustrated with initially the experience of playing the electric guitar, and had to do a lot with guitar amps, pedals, those kinds of things. So I ended up creating an innovative, attachable, smart guitar amplifier that connects to your smartphone to do all the fun things that musicians love to do, like changing how you sound, playing along to other tracks, recording, looping, all of those fun things. And then we're actually working on our 2nd generation product in that space.
Thank you, Chris. Mary Lynn Morris, would you do us the honors, please?
Sure. My name is Mary Lynn Morris, and I am a white woman. I'm wearing glasses. I'm sitting in front of a sky blue kind of background with a black blouse on. I am a professor at the University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida, and I'm a professor in the dance program. So my field is dance. Dance is really my go-to art. I also work in the community and work in the area of dance and disability. I work with dancers with disabilities professionally and in other realms in the community as a dance educator and choreographer. And the invention that I developed in collaboration with engineers over a long period of time, I call it the rolling dance chair. It's basically a type of mobility device or wheelchair that operates in a very different fashion than sort of traditional manual or powered wheelchairs, in that it's controlled via smartphone and it responds to the the leaning actions of the body. It's a wearable type of control that can also be wirelessly held by another individual. So there's a lot of possibilities with the controller. So that's the invention. That's me.
Thank you so much, Mary Lynn. And last but not least, Daniel Joseph.
Hey everyone, as you said, I'm Daniel Joseph. I work at Walt Disney Imagineering. I'm located here in Florida. And I worked at Imagineering for about 15 years. And those of you who don't know what Imagineering is, because it's a funny word, it was a word Walt Disney came up with. That's kind of the combination of imagination and engineering, or artistic know-how and technical abilities. And what I do at Imagineering I think is pretty fun and unique. We basically, as an organization, create all the rides, hotels, and experiences for Disney parks around the world. But my little niche of that is creating the special effects and illusions for all of the different Disney offerings that are out there. So I get to run a laboratory here where we take things apart and put things together and use a lot of tape and fun things to prototype ideas and new inventions to make wacky, magical looking things. It's always different every single day.
Okay. Thank you so much, Daniel, for that explanation of what an Imagineer is and what you do. My next question is a question I'm going to pose to each of you, and I'll give each of you an opportunity to answer. And we'll start with you, Daniel, and we'll work our way back the other way. Would you be so kind, when you start out, Daniel, to give a brief description of yourself, so that I remember Mary Lynn saying to us that it's always a good idea to engage our audience and to make sure, in case there's someone who can't see us or someone who doesn't have a visual, to give them an idea of what we look like and what's going on. You've got so much stuff behind you. Please don't go into what you have behind you, but give us a good description of what you have going on. So my question is, being a creative force in the arts can be challenging, and I know that to be true. What are some of the challenges you faced, and how do you or have you handled negative feedback regarding your ideas, your creations, and in engaging your customers?
Well, first of all, this my description. I'm a Caucasian male with a beard and glasses, with a yellow shirt, and sitting in my crazy mad scientist office here with a lot of different things in the background. But back to your question, I would say usually coming up with, especially things that are so different in my industry, which can involve one day, Daniel, we need to figure out a way to make Mickey Mouse float and look like he's flying around. Or another day, make it look like, Daniel, we want you to be able to put your hand through this wall and then have it come back and the wall to be looking like it's solid. These are crazy, magical questions, and you kind of have to think outside of the box to attack these kinds of things. And usually what I find is I kind of pull from some of the science background I have and some of the design and art and engineering background I have, and come up with methodologies. But if I just hand wave and explain them to people, generally the project teams that I'm working with or folks who are looking to fund these development efforts, I usually get the puppy dog stare, like, what? And sometimes even if I draw a picture on a dry erase board, I get the same thing. But I find when I do a prototype, a little mock-up, even if it's just out of foam core and glue and paper, something like that, and give it to someone, they are completely able to understand it. and all of a sudden you see kind of the rain clouds part and the purse strings open, sometimes to get the idea to the next step, which would involve funding it and exploring it further. So that's something I've definitely learned over the years, is to really show people what I'm thinking versus explain to people what I'm thinking, because it tends to break down a lot of different barriers for people's understanding.
Right. We all learn different ways. We experience art different ways. And some of us are more visual than others. Mary Lynn, I'll ask the question again. Being a creative in the arts is a challenging concept in and of itself. What are some of the challenges that you faced, and how have you had to handle negative feedback, whether it's concerning your idea, your creation, or in engaging the customers who might use your product?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. What Daniel was saying about showing someone a visual and showing images is really, really helpful. That definitely helps communicate a lot of times more than words can. And so I've certainly found that with my project, that has been very important, to just try to show it, to try to show the ideas and show what's happening. Some people have not really seen dancers with disabilities performing before, and dancers using chairs of different types, or mobility devices or canes or anything like that. So that can be really helpful, just to show what it looks like. For me, I think that in the course of my project, one of the difficult things has been that, like in applying for grants or in trying to gain funding in other types of ways, or just networking, sometimes the project has been really pigeonholed. So sometimes people will sort of glam on to like the disability. Oh, this is just for disability, and it's for one type of disability, and it has to be this kind of way. And I always had a much broader vision for the whole project. I mean, my sort of like broader vision was really to sort of see like a center of excellence with artists and engineers working together, and us developing different types of mobility inventions and creations in relationship to moving a human body through space. So this kind of broader vision of moving a human body through space, which is what choreographers do. Choreographers are designers of form and motion. And we are always involved in the physics of physicality of movement, and in terms of moving bodies through space and bodies relating to one another. So being pigeonholed in terms of it being a medical device, right? If it's not a medical device, it's a creative device. It's an expressive are wheelchairs often associated with medical aids? Yes, they are. But so trying to get it out of sort of this medicalized or therapy idea too. Sometimes when people think about disability, they think about therapy. So getting it into that expressive creative realm and keeping it broad. The other thing I was going to say about negative feedback, though, is that negative feedback can be really helpful. I found that even though sometimes we don't love it, we don't love the critique or negative feedback, I feel like there's always little nuggets of truth inside of that feedback, and those can be really helpful things to ask more questions about.
Thank you for such a comprehensive answer. That was great. Chris, I'm excited about the product that you bring to the table. Would you explain it a little bit more? I'm not sure that people get a really good, and please describe yourself. I'm not sure whether people get a good idea of exactly what your invention is. So here we go, trying to explain it, and we're not able to show. But do your best, Chris.
Yeah, I think I should be able to do it. First of all, Caucasian male, 35 years old, short brown hair, blue eyes. I'm wearing a dark navy shirt, kind of, just a regular old white wall background. I'm traveling at the moment. Okay, actually, and let me try and visually describe my product as well, which is something I have to do frequently. So imagine a Bluetooth speaker. Maybe it's about 8 inches wide. The primary use case, it does a lot of things, but what we usually show it off in our marketing materials, it attached to the guitar body, kind of where you would attach the strap to a normal guitar on the back. And then if you want, we also have a phone mount. So your phone can be right there, right beside your right picking hand. And that allows you to control how it sounds, play and pause music, all of those kind of fun things. So it's a premium Bluetooth speaker, has built-in effects, sounds for any instrument really, but certainly electric guitar. But we have a lot of violinists that like to use our product, and vocalists and people who play synth. You can plug into it, with a normal instrument cable, and we also have a wireless transmitter. So that's our product.
That's a great description, and it gives me an idea. Now, one of the things we spoke maybe last week or week before last, and we just talked amongst ourselves. And one of the things that you're disclosing now that I didn't know is that it could be used for the voice, that it could be used to modify a voice or to amplify a voice. That's good to know for those of us who fancy ourselves singers. All right, Robert, moving on to you. And do I need to? I'm going to repeat the question. Please describe yourself. There are challenges being a creative in the arts. So, what are some of the challenges that you faced, and how have you handled negative feedback? And as Mary Lynn has said, it could have been negative feedback that was beneficial and helpful and provided you some guidance. And how do you deal with that feedback regarding ideas, creations, and your customers?
Okay. Yeah, well, first of all, I'm an African-American male, salt and pepper hair and hair and head and facial hair with a maroon polo shirt on. And I'm in my little office / research center at home. And basically, as far as challenges to this invention, the biggest challenge was being able to produce prototypes at a reasonable cost. And that was largely solved when 3D printers became fairly affordable, because all of the prototypes that I've made up to the present have been on my own 3D printer. And I did have, the other challenge was transferring, say, hand drawings to the computer-aided design, CAD, because I'm not a CAD person. So I did find someone that was very good at it and was able to sort of take the drawings and put them into the form needed. And from there, we could transfer it to what we call STL files, which are what the 3D printer uses to make the prototypes. That was my biggest challenge. Basically, doing that. Once the prototypes were made, then I could just put them in my horn and see how they work. Making changes was a sort of two-step process where I had to sort of go back to the CAD person to revise certain dimensions within the mouthpiece to see if that would change the performance. In fact, I'm still in that process now. But there's certain adjustments that we made before actually deciding to submit the patent. And that was the main challenge, was making the prototypes. Negative feedback, I can't say I really got a lot. I got suggestions from people with more experience, which I always took, I had no problem with, because they'd been doing it, I hadn't. And they were, for the most part, it was a very, it was challenging, but also very informative. And I felt, for the most part, it was pretty fulfilling.
Thank you, Robert. I'm going to come back to you now, Chris, and I'm going to ask you, being a named inventor on a patent, has that added value to your company and its stock and its standing in the arena where you operate?
Yes, immensely. So there's a lot of different type of companies, right? And a lot of different paths. So funding is obviously really important, the ability to protect your idea and to explain how you protect yourself from competition. And it just so happens that the IP we were able to get was kind of core to the product that we're making in a very general sense, but also potentially future products, right? It was a very kind of a broad concept in our niche, I guess you could say. And yeah, when I explain what we've kind of got covered, it's very compelling, and it helps you kind of bolster the valuation of your company, which you need if you actually want to get a sizable amount of funding, which is why it was one of the first steps we took, also because we needed to feel that level of kind of confidence that that we could just start, shouting at the rooftops, "Hey, this is what we're trying to do." So it's been massively valuable.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I'm sure that what you just shared provides someone who's listening the impetus to move forward and to consider, am I describing what I am trying to invent too narrowly, or should I step back from it and do a more general explanation of what it is that I feel as though I am creating and I am inventing?
Okay.
I'm going to move now to Daniel. And Daniel, Disney's IP portfolio must be extensive, to say the least. So why is it important, and why is it important for Disney to protect your work?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think one of the things that I feel is very, very unique to Disney in kind of the theme park world and the world of that kind of art and design is we do a lot of our work in design work in-house and develop a lot of the stuff kind of in-house as custom things. And what that really does, I found, and what drew me to Disney as a child and really, wanted to make my trajectory to get there and be an inventor, but be an inventor at Disney, was being able to make these cool things that you could only kind of see at a special Disney park. And like some of those things, I have some printouts of just one of them that I'll show. This is a rose effect I did for a restaurant in Orlando called the Be Our Guest restaurant. It's themed to the Beauty and the Beast, and you can see it's a rose there floating. And this is one of the patents that the company decided to pursue. Disney decided to pursue after I developed this, and it was one of the kind of interesting turning points, I guess, for me as a young inventor. This was about probably 10 years ago, when I realized, hey, that really strange idea that I came up with and built a little prototype of and sat on my desk is actually worth something to people. It's not just a cool, neat thing that is a wow, which is why personally I wanted to make it. But there's people with very, very high end backgrounds and MBAs and smarts that I am definitely on the other end of the spectrum of, in that way of thinking, that see that as an asset and see that as a way to drive growth in business and everything like that, when it's a thing that looks cool and has a neat illusion and has a neat magical aspect to it, translates into dollars, which I think is a neat kind of concept that especially designers and artists and engineers in school, you learn mostly about problem solving and how to make something or how to do something and stuff like that. But you don't necessarily get that connection that I finally got about 10 years ago, that, hey, that thing that I'm doing, that thing that I'm adding to this organization is actually making them money on the bottom line. So I think that's kind of a cool learning experience for me, and helped out a lot in some of that firepower in the future of, hey, as an inventor, we have a lot to add to the world, and there's people out there who really, want this stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you, Daniel. And now, Mary Lynn, I'm going to come to you, and I want to ask you a question about your TED Talk.
Okay.
And in your TED Talk on challenging perceptions about dance, you discuss your journey into disabilities. Would you mind sharing with our audience what made you go down this path working with dancers with disabilities?
Sure. First, I have to ask Daniel, is that a spinning lampshade in your background? Is that I'm drawn to motion as a dancer? I tend to be drawn to motion.
It is, yeah. It's a floating lampshade.
Floating? Nice.
It distracts me too, but I try to keep it.
I love it. So what kind of launched my journey into this invention and this invention path was two main experiences. In 2002, I started working with dancers with disabilities. Mainly, I was working specifically with dancers who were wheelchair users, who had upper body movement, and who both used manual chairs and power chairs. So that was kind of my point of reference. And just as a choreographer and a dancer, I just started questioning the motion possibilities of those chairs, recognizing that those chairs had been designed from a more, let's say, pedestrian perspective of just getting a person from a point A to point B, and not really from like a dance or creative or sort of expressive purpose. How do you want interaction to happen with other people in the space? Do you want other kind of motion possibilities to happen in terms of a creative dynamic in dance? And we use movement to communicate our ideas. So that got me thinking about that. And then also, I had a long history actually of a personal experience in my family. My father was injured in a severe car accident when I was 12, and it left him with a severe brain injury. He was in a coma for about a month before he woke up and had physical complications, a seizure disorder, a lot of issues there. And he also ended up using several different types of mobility devices. So that like family experience really brought me into a kind of more intimate understanding of like the disability world and kind of navigating ADA and navigating societal barriers, attitudinal barriers, a lot of things with disability in general. And then working with dancers with disabilities kind of brought me into really thinking about choreographically what can happen with assistive mobility devices. So those are really the kind of two key motivations. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Thank you so much for your transparency, and thank you for sharing something so personal. I appreciate that, and I think that the audience appreciates that as well. Robert, let me come to you and query you quickly. You've been a musician for a long time, and music is something that you love. I dibbled and dabbled. I played a brass instrument from junior high school through college. I marched in a college band and played a brass instrument. And I understand and know that I know more about mouthpieces than the average person.
Right.
So I want to know, what was it that motivated you to actually solve what was the problem you were trying to solve, or what was the issue that moved you into that space to allow you the opportunity to be creative with regard to mouthpieces?
Well, I think what it was basically through all of my playing career, as far as brass instrument mouthpieces go, there were basically two kinds. There was those that had a sort of rounded bowl kind of shape in them, or they were very straight, what we call V cup. I found that I liked the response of the V-cup mouthpieces as far as moving from one register to the other, going from low to high or high to low. They seemed to work better for me. I didn't particularly care for their sound. They tended to sound a little airy and a little thin, whereas the bowl-shaped mouthpieces, they were warmer sounding, but it took more effort to sort of go between the registers. So my intention was to figure out, well, what's a kind of what kind of incorporates the characteristics sort of each one. And I decided that an ellipse would be probably the shape that kind of encompassed sort of the directness of a V, but with some of the warmth of a bowl shape. And that was basically the thing, because most V-cup mouthpieces were really shallow, and the low register was horrible, really, to put it bluntly. And the bowl-shaped ones were warmer, but just had required more effort. So I decided at some point I was going to try to figure out how can I incorporate this into this elliptical idea into a mouthpiece and see what would happen. And like I say, it was something in my head for a lot of years, and a lot of the possibilities really came, like I say, with the affordability of pretty high quality 3D printers. So at that point, that was what put me in the direction of, okay, well, here's the possibility, because other than that, I mean, it was really pretty expensive to do it any other way. The first couple of prototypes I did, I actually found a local machine shop where I had someone hand machine the pieces out of brass, and each piece was about $800. So to do it by hand, you gotta have a few bucks to be able to make a few prototypes and see which one actually works okay. Compared to the fact that I paid, a little under $2,000 for my own 3D printer, where I can print as many as I need for whatever. It was just so much more economical and so much more convenient. You put the pattern in the morning, turn the machine on, go to work, you come back, mouthpiece made. You check it out and you see what you need to change. So that's sort of where I am at this point. And what I can say from what I have so far, that it has more or less given me a lot of what I sort of expected. There's still some refinements to be made, but for the most part, it's come out pretty well, the experiment.
Fantastic. And innovation begets innovation. That 3D printer has saved you money, saved you time, and assisted you. I'm coming back to you, Chris. So you got to come off mute. Is there an aspect of your creative and inventive journey that you would modify or relive, or what is something that you would do differently that could serve as knowledge that those who are moving into a tech in art space might be able to benefit from?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I can give some of the things that I figured out the hard way that was maybe the most meaningful. It's always hard to say, oh, I wish I had done this differently, because, you end up where you are. And I mean, I approached this because I was solving something for myself. I think, like a number of people on this call, or something that was important to me. So it wasn't necessarily about like, what can I start to like make money or to like get the most valuable patent. It was just something that I really wanted to solve and be my own customer. I think when you are trying to progress with an idea, you need to kind of climb this ladder that I kind of figured out the hard way. And the ladder kind of starts with, at first, usually, I mean, some of us may be lucky and have money right away, but usually you don't have any money, right? Or very little. So you take what little like effort and money you have, and then you need to get to a point of credibility, but only so that you can take that and get more money, probably, right? Because at some point that is going to be a barrier. Now, it might not, but usually it doesn't have to be a huge amount, but you need to, or money, or some assets or resources you have, could be people or whatever. And then you take those resources, could be money, whatever it is, and then you have to get as far as you can with more credibility. Could be advancing your design, could be formalizing your patent, could be getting it to market, whatever. And then you keep kind of doing that. But the mistake that I do see people take is they take all the money that they have, and they kind of get to 80 or 90% before they've got that next rung, and they kind of get stuck. And they can get stuck there for a year, because it can be really hard to know how you get to the next place. So I think it's important to look ahead and says, where's my next stepping stone? Not necessarily where would I, like selfishly, maybe you would just like to design all day, or selfishly, maybe you would just like to market all day, or whatever you would like to do. I think you need to be a bit really disciplined and go, what's my next stepping stone, so that you don't end up in a place where there's no way to progress.
For me, you just sent me over to Daniel, because Daniel wants to create all day long. That's what he does. That's who he is. So Daniel, I ask you the same question. Do you find yourself so scattered and in so many different projects, or are you able to focus in on specific projects? And do they give you deadlines and tell you, well, we want this for this park by this time? And how do you deal with that? And are there some things that you would do differently or would have done differently in your innovation journey?
I think the answer to all those questions is like a resounding yes. I definitely find over the years I've been sometimes more than others scattered on more things than I can give each one its amount of dedication to. Because really, I think everyone on here is echoing. You need to be able to do a deep dive into an idea, into a design, into an invention, to really solve it or come up with something new. And just kind of touching the surface of an idea and all that, like Chris is saying, is just part of the battle, because then there's no next step after that. You're kind of left unfinished, which for a problem solver and inventors, I think is one of the worst things you could do, because then it's like, I need to get back to that someday, but I don't know when I will, and I don't know what the outcome will be. It's kind of like this looming cliffhanger, if you will. But I get to work on, and I say I get to, because it is truly equally a passion and a job. I've had people tell me this before, including my wife. Well, if you weren't doing it at work, you'd be doing the same thing in our garage. And over COVID, the depth of COVID, when it was really, really bad and we were all at home, I was doing this kind of stuff in my garage. But what I found then, which was really interesting and kind of the silver lining of the pandemic issues, was I found a way to really look at the different projects I'm on and give them hierarchy, and be able to give more time to each project, and be able to say no to certain projects, even because maybe my expertise isn't as valuable as someone else's on that project. I wouldn't just take everything I could get, and be more strategic about it. So each one of the projects and each one of the designs that I get to work on is kind of geared toward the Daniel expertise of Imagineering. So coming out of the pandemic, that for me has been a huge sea change in just how I approach design and invention. And I think I've been able to be a lot more strategic that way with all the different projects I'm working on, because I am based in Florida. I originally started at Imagineering in California and then moved down here a few years ago. But I get to work on all the parks, in China and Paris and in Japan, obviously California. So it's all over the globe. And if I'm not going to be the strategic, then I'm just not going to be able to invent as much. So I've been able to invent more, I found, nowadays, from that whole learning.
So being more strategic and prioritizing has helped you to be that much more efficient in what you're doing.
Yes, yes.
Can we refer to that as the Daniel effect?
I think, I don't know if it's the Daniel effect or if it's like the out of tough situations like a worldwide pandemic, you learn something.
Right.
But for me that definitely helped, and I find I'm able to be more free in what I'm working on and design, and not be as scattered.
Gotcha. Mary Lynn, I'm going to ask you the same question. Creatively, what would you have done differently in your journey? And what advice would you share with those who might be moving into a tech in the arts arena?
Well, of course, I'm housed in a university, structure. So that's how I kind of moved through the patent process and a variety of things. And I feel fortunate that I had a lot of those things in place where I had resources that I could kind of tap into with regard to like the patent process. But I think someone mentioned earlier in our conversation that in terms of my education primarily as an artist, as a dance artist, patents and marketing and a lot of these other pieces were processes I wasn't familiar with. So I had to do a lot of education myself and ask questions. And I think if I had to do it again, I'd be a little bit more proactive in that kind of seeking those questions earlier, perhaps. And the importance also of, because my project has been very collaborative. I've really collaborated across in interdisciplinary ways, and I always have done a lot of interdisciplinary work working with people in the medical field as well as engineers. And two of my collaborators that I've been working on more closely in the last years, Mark Rumsey and Neil Edmonston, we've really worked well together. And I think a part of that has been the efforts at communication across our domains, and the meeting each other kind of halfway and all of that, and the respect issue. And I would just say that it's really important when you're collaborating to have clear roles and responsibilities, and you might have to change, that may evolve over time, but you need to sort of make a point of communicating that, writing it down, having good documentation of your processes, and accountability. I mean, I would say that was one of the things that I think if I had to go back, just making sure that there was a real sense of accountability of the benchmarks that we were trying to accomplish, because again, some of my early collaborators within the university scope had a lot of other things going on. They had a lot of other projects going on. In my case, this project was central for me, but those kinds of things need to be discussed about benchmarks and how you accomplish things. The other thing I was going to mention, though, in listening to the other panelists, is that as much as prioritizing and strategizing and organizing and goal setting is so important and so necessary, there are things that I've just noticed where things ebb and flow, and you also have to be able to like release control and let go. And there's times when I would say improvisation is actually really important. A kind of an improvisational attitude where, and that's not to say you don't have intention, but that you are kind of like, where is the path headed right now? Like, I sort of need to be responsive to this and not like cling to this one goal that I've sort of set. This is what's happening now, or this collaboration. Sometimes collaborations change. And that's the other thing, different doors open, different possibilities emerge. So I think for me also, just to the audience, just recognizing improvisation, actually being part of it, being a part of that process as much as you are going towards benchmarks and goals and goal setting. There is that piece of it too.
Wow. As a group, I feel like I've learned so much. I consider myself an artist. I don't have any tech in the arts, but I consider myself an artist, and I feel so lucky to have had this opportunity to engage you now on multiple occasions. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start with Chris. I'm going to go to Robert. I'm going to go to Daniel, and I'm going to let you end, Mary Lynn. And I'm going to give each one of you, we've got about 6 minutes or so left. What would you share with the audience about your experience in and of itself? What have you learned about yourself? Or is there something about the experience that you've learned that you could share that could be beneficial or that could edify someone else? So, Chris, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. I mean, I started off in engineering and then teaching. I didn't realize that I was an inventor or innovator. I mean, I kind of learned, you don't learn everything about yourself, unfortunately, sometimes until you're like late 20s, right? But I was innovating and inventing as a teacher. Like I was doing those kinds of things. I was tinkering in my house and all those kinds of things. And then I kind of slowly realized, I was like, this is what I want to be doing. And that was, yeah. And then I was just like, okay. And then I had to quit. I eventually had to quit my job, right, to kind of follow this opportunity.
Scary.
But I guess maybe I'll share this. I think the last thing I said was one of my big learnings, but this other one as well about risk. So if you're, first of all, I did this as a side hustle for a very long time, but I've been full-time for a number of years. And the way I looked at it is, if this didn't go well and I needed to go back, I could, those jobs, I could find something. We're not going to go hungry. And right. It's just basically all you're doing is kind of maybe delaying another path. But the upside of following, creating something can be not only just super fulfilling, but, really, really rewarding in a lot of different ways. And I would say that it's not as risky as it might feel like to take a huge detour if you're really passionate about inventing, creating, or launching something. I think it just feels that.
Thank you, Chris. Robert, have you something that you can share with us?
I think the takeaway I got was that, two things. Don't necessarily devalue what your idea might be. You might say, oh, well, that's not going to work. Sort of don't devalue an idea you might have. And the second thing is not to be afraid to follow it down the path it's going to lead. There are going to be obstacles, but they're surmountable, and just to believe in it and keep going.
Thank you, Robert. Daniel, they're prompting me with the bell ringing, and so I'm gonna ask you to give me a couple of things, and I would really love Mary Lynn to be able to close us out.
All right. Well, I would just say passion, passion, passion. I think everyone else kind of said it in so many words, but that it's amazing where that can lead you. And by having passion about an idea or a craft, it gives other people confidence in backing you up, because passion is contagious. And I really think that's my biggest thing.
Mary Lynn, I see that Jennifer's with us, so we're coming down to the end, but I'd love to give you an opportunity. Share some words of wisdom. You've been so great with us.
I can do this really quickly. So just to sum up what everyone said, just adding to what Daniel said, passion, absolutely. And just two more words, patience and persistence. So passion, patience, and persistence.
I am in awe of this awesome panel. You all have been amazing. I thank you for sharing this event and your time and your skill and your experiences and your passion and your persistence. And we thank you. I'm going to turn this back over to Jennifer. Please know that I will be reaching out to each one of you, not only to thank you for participating in this, but for enriching me. And I really do appreciate it.